I'm Doug, Stand-Up Physicist. Today I'm going to discuss diabetes, a disease I'm rather familiar with. Now this doesn't have that much physics, but it does have some. It shows, for example, that energy is central to everything that works, and that includes life and diseases that happen in life. And that everything is local. My problems are my problems. They're not yours. But I'm going to go through and explain the basics of diabetes. I'm going to tell you how I discovered that I had this particular problem. And I'm going to try and dispel a few myths. And also how this disease has really affected me, both in terms of some costs, but some benefits too. So what is diabetes? Well, in the most general way, it's about energy management. You take in fuel through sugar, and your body knows how to take oxygen from the air and burn it to produce carbon dioxide. Same thing happens in a coal plant. They bring in carbon, they bring in oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide. Now in the body it's much more controlled, there's no nice flame, but on a chemical level there's a lot of similarities to it. And what has to happen is that the sugar has to go from the bloodstream into the cell. Well, how does it do that? There is a hormone called insulin that acts as a doorman. It allows the sugar to go from the bloodstream into the cell to be burned. Now, there are two major forms of diabetes. The first form, called juvenile onset or type 1 or insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus, is caused by the insulin-producing factories to be destroyed. The body, for reasons we do not understand yet, decides to wipe out all of those cells. And because those cells aren't there to make insulin, you need to get insulin from the outside. Since it's a protein, you can't put it in a pill and swallow it because your stomach will say, "Protein, I think I'll just digest that." So it must be injected. The second kind of diabetes is called late onset or type 2. It happens about 10 times more frequently than type 1. What happens there is that the body gets tired of responding to the insulin. It just says, I don't want to pay attention anymore. I've let so much sugar into these cells over all these periods of years, I'm just going to close my ears. Well, that's a problem, because it means that the glucose then piles up in the bloodstream. There are several ways to deal with this type of disease. One way is for people to actually lose weight so that all of their cells become more responsive to their physical situation. Or there are a series of medications that can increase the sensitivity of the cells to insulin, or make the insulin producing cells make more insulin. Or for some people, they do have to take some shots. How did I discover that I was in this situation? Well, it was the summer of my 22nd year, and I had graduated from MIT with a degree in biology and a degree in chemical engineering. I got a 2-for-1 sale. And I was looking forward to my very first job, which was to clone the genes from the bacteria that causes leprosy. Quite a first job just coming out of college. And during that summertime, I was drinking a lot of Mellow Yellow and going to the bathroom a lot. And I thought this was this little loop. Drink Mellow Yellow, go to the bathroom. But it was getting kind of odd because I would get a can of soda and like suck it down in like 15 seconds. So needless to say, I was going to the bathroom a lot. But I had planned to see my father, and we were going to the Boundary Waters canoe area. So I flew back to Minnesota, and we lived in Minneapolis, and it's like a 6 or 7 hour drive up there. We decided for the first time not to take a guide. That we were bright enough, him, a Harvard grad, me, an MIT grad, to figure out where we were going. Well, the very first lake, we took the wrong direction. And so we didn't go on our planned route. We just did this really small little trip. But I was drinking like a fish. I mean, every chance I could, I had the little cup over the side and just like down in it again and again and again. And on our way back, we stopped in Duluth at a Pizza Hut. And my father got a Lone Brow, and I got a pitcher of Coke, all for myself. And my father was a little concerned, but I really felt that thirsty, and I finished off that pitcher of Coke by myself. And I actually felt like having another one for the road, but I saw my dad was concerned, so I didn't. And on the drive back, well, I had to go to the John. And so we pull over, and I do my thing. And it's one of those gas stations that sells soda. So I got myself a 20-ounce bottle of Diet Coke, and I sucked that down in around 10 seconds. And I'm driving back to Minneapolis. And my father is like very conservative about driving. I mean, I've been doing 55 the whole time. But then I started to increase the speed a little bit to 60. To 65. And my father starts like grabbing onto the dash. Because he's concerned about how fast I'm going. Well, I start going 70. And he's got both hands on the dash. And we finally pull in to his place, and he's like, "Why, by the way, were you driving so fast?" And it's like, "Because I had to go to the bathroom." And so I made it, but I decided to make an appointment to see a doctor because these symptoms were starting to like interfere with how I lived my life. And so I go back, and my girlfriend at the time, who was a pre-med, she had this wonderful Black Forest cake and some nice sweet Ospi spumante, and we had a good time. But I had to get up in the middle of the night like twice to go to the bathroom. And she said, "You know, it's nice that you're back, but you know, your breath smells a little funny." I was like, "Well, maybe I should brush my teeth again." But she was a pre-med, and she said, "You know, you might just have diabetes." I was like, "Well, it's certainly a possibility, a formal possibility." She said, "Well, why don't you talk to that Lisa girl who does have diabetes and just see?" Okay. I said, "Fine." So I go down and I talk to Lisa, and she says, "Well, the symptoms are that you drink like a fish." I said, "Ooh, that's me." "And then you have to go to the bathroom a lot." It's like, "Well, if you do one, the other follows. So yeah, I'm there." And she said, "And you lose weight." I said, "People have been commenting me on how I've been losing weight. And have you ever had a dizzy spell?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've had a dizzy spell. And does your breath smell a little funny?" I was like, "I've gotten a complaint along those lines." And she said, "Is your tongue a little foamy?" I said, "You got it. My tongue is foamy. What's up with that? I said, well, that's your ketones being broken down by your tongue because your cells are starving, but no, we're not sure you have diabetes. And I said, no, I think if I'm 6 for 6 on these symptoms, I got diabetes. And she said, look, I've got a meter up in my room. After my shift is over, we'll go test it and we'll just get some data. So we go and we do the measurement. It's off the scale of the meter. So she's like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, why? It's like, you just explained 7 for 7 my symptoms. I have diabetes. And she was like, well, you can't be sure. The doctor hasn't. It's like, no. 7 for 7, I've got it. Now, I had an appointment to see the doctor on a Tuesday. It was a Thursday night. I said, let's call the doctor, say, I want to meet you Friday morning because I've got diabetes. And so I go there and they say, well, that's 7 for 7, but we can't be sure. It's like, I'm sure. Said, we'll call you late afternoon or something. Well, they call me at noon and they say, get back here. And sure enough, I did have diabetes. And they gave me my first shot of insulin, and I was able to sleep through the night. So this was a big improvement. There are lots of different emotional responses to this kind of news. I mean, they're supposed to go through like anger and denial. I actually had exactly 2. The first one was surprise. I mean, 22 years I've been fine. And now you tell me I have to take this drug like 3-4 times a day and I've got to go on this diet till I'm dead. Now? I mean, what's up with that? Why did it happen at this time? That doesn't make sense to me. I was pretty darn healthy up to this point. And the second reaction I had was that I wanted every bit of information I could get about diabetes. So I read everything I could. Because coming into the doctors, I really knew only 2 things. The first was about needles. Dun dun, dun dun, dun dun. Oh, fear of these things, right? That's the worst conceivable thing out there, right? Well, let me just show you something here. You can't see this, but that's a 29 gauge needle. Okay, that doesn't mean much. It really is tiny. And it's injected subcutaneously. Another word that probably doesn't mean much. But it means that it just goes in a thigh. So, you've got a really thin needle going into a place that doesn't have that many nerves, such that about half the time, I literally do not feel it. There are times when I do, and it's just a little, hey, but that's it. See, most people have experience with needles in a vein. Well, a vein is actually completely surrounded by nerve endings. Nerves are running all up and down those veins. You go into a vein, you have to move over a bunch of nerves. And every time you move those nerves, they're going to go, hey, as you well know. That hurts. This doesn't. Big difference. The other thing that I knew was that you couldn't eat any sugar. Now, being a nerd, I wanted to know why. Why could I no longer eat sugar? Now, I read in many places that I couldn't. But I didn't get the why. Like in anything. So, I thought about this and I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this carbohydrate counting thing that they recommend. Because that's what matters. The amount of carbs I take in each and every single meal, no exceptions. But I'm going to allow myself to take in some simple sugars. I'm going to allow myself to eat some sweets. Now, I didn't talk to my doctor about this one, but the thought was that if I have a slice of bread and I slobber on it, which I always do as soon as I put it in my mouth, that slobber has an enzyme called amylase that breaks down the carbohydrate into sugar as soon as they two come in contact. So if I put sugar in my mouth or I put some bread and then slobber on it, it's going to be the same. So my thought was that if I really pay attention to the carbos, that's what matters. And it made living with diabetes much more bearable, because I didn't have to say no, 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 absolutely no to sugar. I had to say I can have some as long as it's part of a plan. And what was amazing was that a decade after I first came down with diabetes is that people started doing experiments where they had people eat, say, ice cream or eat hot carrots and then see how fast their blood glucose rose. And they found out through experimentation that people who ate hot carrots, their sugar rose faster than the equivalent amount of ice cream. Because digestion is a really complicated sport. And so it was great that my own speculation about managing diabetes was later confirmed by experiment, and in fact is now endorsed by the American Diabetes Association, that says what diabetics have to do is count and manage their carbohydrates every time they have a meal. The movies have low blood glucose reactions all wrong. They usually show the person with the low blood glucose like shaking or doing something dramatic. Well, remember, this is about fuel, and the fuel is low. And so therefore, you're much more mellow and plant-like and not responding at all. You're dull visually. And so Hollywood doesn't like that. But it's actually fascinating because it shows that energy is local, because you can have different parts of your brain like tune out. I've had like my visual stuff go out, so I can no longer read. I've gotten to the point where I am having trouble forming sentences. The vocal stuff is going. I've had my hearing kind of fade out. I've gotten uncoordinated. And even some stuff down there serves as a glucose meter. So it's really much more complicated. Every episode is different. Different things fail. Now, people think that it's like sleeping. That's got to be the lowest energy state there is. But it's not, which is very fortunate for me. Because the very first week that I had diabetes, I went to sleep. And sometime like 1 or 2 a.m., I woke up. And I said, I usually don't wake up at this hour. And I said, well, I wonder if it's one of those low blood glucose things. And so I got up and I was a little wobbly. I said, I bet that wobbly is a sign. And so I actually got down on my hands and knees and I crawled to the refrigerator because I wanted to make sure I got there. And I had myself, half a glass of orange juice. And that was enough within about a half an hour's time to return to normal and go back to sleep. But it had a really profound effect on me concerning death. Because I had this huge fear of death when I was in my adolescent years. I would sit in bed and think about myself in a casket and, going, disintegrating till I was in my skull. It was just the skull and bones and like really graphic stuff. And get really frightened. And my head just couldn't deal with the idea of me like not being there. Well, as I went along with diabetes, I actually ended up in the hospital half dozen times. So I essentially got practice at dying. And if you practice dying, then you realize it's easy to do. Everyone figures out a way to die. Now, how does everyone figure that out if no one takes classes in it? It's because it's what happens when your energy just gets lower and lower and lower. And you can't really have this big battle at the end because you don't have the energy for it. But the thing is that I crawled to the refrigerator to survive. And so that taught me, kind of in a very practical way, that that's what life is like. That you really need to struggle to get there, to avoid death. Because death is really boring. I mean, it's beyond boring. And you want to do what you can to avoid it while you can. So I really got a deep lesson from that. But I also got something really positive out of this whole major chronic illness. And that was that to manage my disease, I went to bed at around the same time, and I woke up at around the same time, and I had my breakfast at around the same time, and I had my lunch around the same time, and I had about the same amount of dinner at the same time. I set up this steady pattern, which wasn't the way I led my life as an undergrad. I would go off and I'd play pinball for a few hours, and then there would be a poker game or maybe a risk game, and I'd go play that till whenever. And then, if I had to do some homework, I'd rush and get it done, and, all over the place, because that's what all my friends did. But then when I got this chronic illness, I had to get this regularity to my life. And that meant that I was much more productive. And so for that very first job I had, where I was supposed to do all this molecular biology that I didn't know how to do, well, I would come in at a regular time and say, well, how do I figure this out? Well, I don't know, but I'm here, and I've had enough breakfast, and I would struggle, and I would get things done. And so I did clone 5 genes from the bacteria that causes leprosy. I sequenced the major protein antigen. I figured out how to map the epitopes of that particular protein. And I cloned the second largest polymerase from yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I got a lot done, 12 papers. It was very productive. But one of the key reasons was that I was leading a regular kind of life due to my illness. This illness is going to cost me probably about 25 years on my life. But we live in such a time that I am living now, thanks to science. So really, in the end, it's turned out to be a positive. Thank you very much.
All the girls in the classroom think he's hot. He shows up wearing the sandals with the white socks. He hears them giggling while he's got his back to the class. He thinks he's got an eraser mark on his ass. And all the girls from the hall show up to hear him talk, even though most of the time he's covered in chalk. Math prof, rock star. Math prof, rock star. Oh yeah. Math prof, rock star. He was young, he never thought that he would be a math prof, rock star. And after hours outside of his office, there's a line waiting, full of girls who want to ask about their quadratic equations. She leans over the desk and twirls a pencil in her hair, complains the grade he gave her was way unfair. And all the professors, they laugh about it and they wish him well. The guys in the class are all just jealous as hell.
Hello, I'm Doug, and I am not a doctor. I'm also not a PhD, although I tried twice. One of the neat things about cable television is that you can explore things that commercial TV just never would get at. For example, there's been a product that has been advertised for decades on commercial television. And yet, with Preparation H, they've never shown you how to properly apply it. And I'm not going to do that on this show either. I like the concept, but the reality, But think about this. They spent like tens of millions of dollars so that we can know the catchphrase, painful rectal itch. And I'm going to refer to that as PRI because they aren't paying me anything. So this is not a product placement kind of thing. And the thing about painful whatever is I think it's really more embarrassing. I get embarrassed every time I hear the darn phrase. I wish they would just say PRI, so we could like discuss it that way, like ED. And that's not Mr. Ed, that's Mr. Dick going to sleep. So, I don't think painful is the right word. Imagine the scene in an emergency room. Oh my gosh, my PRI is so bad. Nurse, could you help me apply the Preparation H? No, not the male nurse. I want the nurse with the big titties. Oh, it hurts so bad. Oh, but don't tell me Mom about this episode. Don't tell me sister, it's too embarrassing. Don't tell me girlfriend, she'll leave me. Don't tell my job, don't fire me.